Well, welcome. This is a video on small group facilitation and or leadership for recovery. And I want to share five core guidelines that are well known. But the reason why I'm making this video, and I wish I had the technology right now set up to actually speak to you, so it's just going to be an audio video with titles, is that I really truly can count on one hand how many times I've been in a group that was led correctly. And this is a real problem. And I end up being the bad guy because, and I'll get into that. But the main focus that I unfortunately is lost amongst what I'll call well-intentioned men in either church groups or outside of church groups is that if you don't uphold the guidelines, it quenches, stagnates, suffocates the growth of the group. And this is where ignorance is bliss. If you are, in particular, a younger man and you're not used to this type of group, or even an older man, you may think that this is a great group. And because you've never been in a community where you can actually share thoughts and feelings and start getting into stuff in the company of men. Sometimes it takes men 3 months, 6 months before they actually start sharing. It literally takes that long. And the main reason why is a combination of guilt and shame and vulnerability. So the goal is to keep the circle safe so that men can get to the deeper issues, and that requires vulnerability. And the number one issue with men in particular is a fear of vulnerability. And that is why these groups never reach their potential, despite having these guidelines that are supposed to be upheld. So that's kind of an idea of where I'm going here. And for anybody who's in a group, and most in particular is wanting to lead a group, you really need to practice upholding these guidelines. And I'll share several techniques that I've used in the past that really help, so that you are not confronting another person. You're simply pulling them back to, this is what we agreed upon. This is the guideline. And in many ways, doing a mock and or explaining it and doing almost a dramatic role playing really can have a great impact in letting the people in the community, the men in the community, however many are in the group, know what the guidelines are and how they work. Because most men are going to be so caught up in trying to get out what they're dealing with. Okay, so that's just a basic introduction. I think it'll make sense as I go along. So what I want to basically do right now is just share 5 core guidelines. And the first is keep your sharing focused on your own thoughts and feelings. Keep your sharing focused on your own thoughts and feelings. And within that would be, depending on your group, limit your sharing to 3 to 5 minutes. Okay. Number 2, there is no crosstalk. Now, crosstalk is when two people engage in conversation, excluding all others. And each person is free to express his or her feelings without interruptions. There is no crosstalk. 1, keep your sharing focused on your own thoughts and feelings, limiting your time. 2, there is no crosstalk. 3, we're here to support one another and not fix one another. This keeps us focused on our own issues. In other words, no fix-it dialogue. And this is a real issue, and I'll get into that. So I'm just going to keep repeating just as a technique to just, keep this in mind. Keep your sharing focused on your own thoughts and feelings and limit your time. There is no crosstalk. We are here to support, so no fix-it dialogue. We're not here to fix one another. 4, anonymity and confidentiality are basic requirements. What's shared in the group stays in the group. There are only exceptions when someone threatens to injure themselves or others. Anonymity and confidentiality. So again, 1, keep your sharing focused on your own thoughts and feelings. have a time limit. There's no crosstalk. Number 3, no fix-it dialogue. We're not here to fix one another. 4, anonymity and confidentiality. And 5, just control the offensive language. Now, this is more important in a Christ-centered group, and I'll talk more about all of that. So those are the basic 5 core guidelines. Now, those guidelines sound simple, but when you are in a group with 3, 5, up to 10 men, usually 10, over 10 men is difficult. I try to cap it at no more than 10. You'll be amazed at how difficult it is to have a group leader actually support these guidelines and maintain a proper control over the group. Because when these guidelines are violated, it dramatically impacts how safe other men feel in the group, either consciously or unconsciously. Many times unconsciously. Keep in mind, people are in recovery for a reason. And many times they're so used to dysfunctional groups and or dysfunctional families, many times I will hear, I had no problem with this. I'm used to it. That's not a good response. That's not a healthy response. So there's a paradigm shift that needs to take place in how to relate to one another. So that is a really important thing. So I will go through now each one of the guidelines. Okay, number 1, keep your sharing focused on your own thoughts and feelings. So basically this is, you're not speaking about somebody else, your spouse, somebody you're dating, formerly family member, their hurts, habits, or hang-ups, if you will, but you're focusing on your own thoughts and feelings. So here's what an inappropriate response would be when a man is time to share. It sounds like this. I think we all struggle with anger. I mean, all men struggle with, things. I don't think I'm alone here. So there's an indicator that this man immediately is either teaching or preaching when you think about it. I think all men struggle. What you're saying is you're actually teaching me something or preaching to me. No, this is where the group leader steps in and says, who? And many times at that point in time, that man will pause and not even be aware of what he just said. He's not even aware that he's getting outside of himself. And he needs to be brought to say, I struggle with anger. And you will hear his tone change. I think all men struggle with anger. I mean, hey, we live in a society that's all screwed up, man. I mean, that changes from, I struggle with anger. Pause. I have a real anger problem. And you'll see a man just soften and his tone will change because he's so used to just externalizing in his head and analyzing, and he's completely detached from his own thoughts and feelings. So you got to stick to I statements or me statements, not you or we statements. Keeping your sharing focused. So one of the techniques of the facilitator at this stage, one thing I would do as I teach these guidelines is to say, I will use the word who to bring you back. Other men will tap on a chair. I like to just be direct with it. Who? Now, my job as a facilitator is to be listening. When you let this go as a facilitator, a group leader, it makes it more difficult to bring it back. So right off the bat, I would share that if you get out of I statements or me statements and you get into, you are all or we are all, I'm immediately going to bring you back. And part of being in this group is accepting that. If you don't want to do that, or at that point in time you don't want to share, you can just pass. And along with this is limiting the sharing to 3 to 5 minutes. You will have some men that will literally say one sentence. Other men will go on for 20 minutes if you don't stop them. And so there are some men that literally have a clock, on their phone. Beep, 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 beep. That's not my thing. I'll tap on a chair and basically say, or point 1 more minute. I'll put a 1 on. You got about 1 more minute. So, or wrap it up and real quietly. And that is a good benchmark for that man to wrap it up. When he hits the 5 minute mark, I usually just say, hey, I really appreciate it. Thank you for your share, and cut him off. Now, if there's only 3 men in the group, you can extend that. There's guidelines here. But if you have 5, 7, 8 men, you have to limit it and give everybody an opportunity. So keep your sharing focused on your own thoughts and feelings, and then limit the sharing to 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, number 2, there is no crosstalk. Now again, crosstalk is when two people engage in conversation excluding all others. Each person is free to express his or her feelings without interruptions. Now, if you've ever been in a group study, let's say a reading group or a Bible study, crosstalk takes place all the time. And literally you can have 5 to 7 people in the group, but 2 people just dominate the dialogue. This cannot happen in a recovery group. Crosstalk needs to be quenched immediately. Crosstalk is also making distracting comments or questions while somebody is sharing. Crosstalk could be somebody tapping on their chair and they're not even aware of it. Or when somebody makes a comment, they just go, come on. That's crosstalk. And this is why it's so difficult for group leaders to maintain this. You have to stop and pause and say, I'm sorry, but that's crosstalk. And most men will find this offensive. They are not used to being marshaled at that level of discipline. And at this point in time, it doesn't matter what that man thinks. I'm telling you, it doesn't matter what that man thinks. If he wants to get up and leave, let him walk. This is why group leaders that are codependents are really some of the worst leaders. They're the nicest people, but they're so afraid to confront others. You cannot be codependent. You need to stand up and say, I'm sorry. And you don't have to be mean about it. You don't have to be militant about it. And you just got to go back. This is why it's so important to communicate the guidelines and read them every meeting. And they will be upheld. And depending on whether it's a closed group and how long you're there. But if you have an open group, you really have to uphold this, especially if somebody's coming in off the street and they've never been a part of it. They may have never been in a group like this, and they have no clue of their unconscious cross-talking behaviors. So this includes speaking to another member while the group is somebody sharing or responding. And again, if you walk in another person's shoes, you don't like to be interrupted. There's so many men that they don't share because what's the point of speaking if nobody's listening? So one of the disciplines I would tell men is you don't have to stare at a man, but make an effort that when a man starts speaking, you make an effort to really focus and then ease back. And that's where pacing comes in. But there is no talk. That's why the 3 to 5 minute is so important, because after, 5 minutes, it's difficult sometimes to listen to a man, go on and on and on. So you really have to watch that time limit and avoid crosstalk. And to add to the crosstalk, this will get back to number 3, fix-it dialogue. So there is no crosstalk, and there's many examples of that. Again, tapping, making comments, sighing, so forth. You're there to support the other person. You can disagree with everything they're saying. It doesn't matter if you disagree with what they're saying. It's not your time. So as simple as that sounds, very difficult to uphold. Number 3, we're here to support one another, not fix one another. This keeps us focused on our own issues. So we are not there to give advice, solve somebody's problems, play counselor, psychologist, therapist, pastor. We're not licensed counselors, psychologists, or therapists, nor are other members of the group, even if you are. In fact, I would say those who are teachers too. They're so used to fixing other people. Celebrate Recovery or other groups are not designed for this. It's up to the participants to include outside support, counseling. to their own program when they're ready. So fix-it dialogue, sounds like, it sounds exactly like it would take place where you're literally telling somebody, hey, after somebody shares, a man will say, hey, I got a great book for you. Have you ever read? No, fix-it dialogue. Have you ever listened to this? Fix-it dialogue. Hey, there's great YouTubes on that. Fix-it dialogue. Because you are putting yourself in a position of power against that other man, and that is not your role. The only exception to this is afterwards. If you share something and the group is over and a man comes up to you and says, you mentioned something that really helped you. Would you be open to, I like the phrase, would you be open? Would you be open to sharing what that is? That's after, and that's not fix-it dialogue. A man came up to you and asked for your advice about something, or that's very different. But in the group itself, you're not there to fix one another. And again, as a group leader, you must maintain control over that and call it out. That's fix-it dialogue. And again, many times men will, I'm just trying to help somebody, man. That's fix-it dialogue. Now, if you explain the guidelines correctly and thoroughly, there is not a debate between the facilitator or the guideline leader and the particular person in the group, because it's been explained. And if they don't want to accept it, then you have to say, you and I'll talk to you after. I'll talk to you after, but this group will move on. Okay? If they at that point still can't handle it, my thing was, I'm going to have to pause the group. I'm sorry, but these are the guidelines. We agree to them. So you're free to leave if you want. I've already asked you that I'll talk to you afterwards, but this group will not move on if you're going to rebel against, the way this group's being led. And that's fine. You go to another group. I wish you the best. Again, you can't be codependent. You have to control that group. And for a lot of men, younger men in particular, they'll feel really uncomfortable about this at first. But you are there to support that circle and keep it safe. So no fix-it dialogue. We're not here to fix one another. Okay, number 4, anonymity and confidentiality are basic requirements which shared in the group stays in the group. The only exception is when someone threatens to injure themselves or others. This is kind of a no-brainer, but I will tell you it's probably one of the most violated guidelines, and it usually takes place afterwards. When two men are hanging out, talking at the cars, they'll start literally gossiping. What that means is you're not to share this information with your spouse, your family, your coworkers. This means not discussing what is shared in the group among members. And it is called gossip. So you go home and your wife or partner or whatever says, so how'd it go? And you just go off. You can't believe what this one guy said, man. And what happens is you won't mention his name, but you will go into detail. This is the most violated guideline outside of the group. And this is one of the great difficulties, because anonymity and confidentiality, when they are broke, it will destroy the recovery process in that group faster than anything else. Once this gets out, you can't be trusted. And once trust is broken and trust is violated, the group, and many groups, will exist for years. But it's because men just show up. These are the work ethic guys. They'll just show up. But the group is really dysfunctional. And it's basically mimicking the dysfunctional home they grew up in. And this is the paradigm shift that has to take place. And so again, as a group leader, go into great detail. So when we say anonymity and confidentiality are basic requirements, here's what this means. And give specific examples. When you're talking to somebody at your car, when you're talking about this or that. Now, if somebody brought something up that triggered something in you, or you related to, again, you can go and talk to that person, or you can have a conversation based on an idea or a concept, but you are really not involving specific details about that person's life. So this is one of those guidelines that will make or break a group. Okay, number 5 is offensive language. Now this one, if you're in a secular group, if you will, this is called the anonymous groups, but in a Christian group, I would even say in any groups, words have power. So I really try to avoid men sharing by dropping the F-bomb. Some men, they just F-bomb their whole conversation. And I think it's a discipline to get out of angry language. And this could be really difficult for those who are used to that, in avoiding graphic descriptions. So if somebody's sharing, and they're sharing about a personal struggle, to just say, let's avoid graphic descriptions. You don't need to express the publication or the specific website that you are struggling on, so forth. That doesn't necessarily add to the group. And this is one that really needs to be explained. So, because this can really threaten or make some other people feel uncomfortable with how explicitly a speaker is sharing regarding his or her behaviors. At that point in time, you will give people an opportunity to raise their hand if they just kind of feel threatened. Most at first will not. Then the speaker will respect that boundary. And that's really what we're talking about, is the boundaries. And the idea here is to avoid potential triggers that could cause a person to act out. And this is why emphasizing at the close of the meeting that small group guidelines stay intact as the participants interact with one another after the meeting. And it's better to have, just to use A, B, C, D, F type grading scale. It's better to have a C plus B meeting that was controlled than striving for that A meeting and triggering somebody. You can, work up to it. It's like playing an instrument. You don't start off playing great, but work up to the consistencies as a group leader in all 5 of these guidelines. And it will take discipline, and you can simply say, we're all in this together. And this is going to be something that we're going to have to work out. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. It's just like becoming a teacher and classroom management, so forth. The problem I find is that very few men practice this, so that the group, after 3 months, is really in a deep groove, rather than it seems like you just started this group a week ago, because there's, crosstalk, and men are talking outside of, sharing their own thoughts and feelings, or they're breaking these guidelines left and right. And again, all this will do is not keep the circle safe and keep men from vulnerability and going deeper into what's really going on in their lives. And that is the whole purpose of dealing with these groups in recovery. So all of this is to say that if you are a group leader, you really have a high calling, and it's good to just practice this. Do mock meetings, in your bedroom if you have to. Sit and observe. Hopefully you have somebody that will mentor you. But if you've been in these meetings, and you go over this, you will be aware of, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. There's so much crosstalk. There is, so many guys talking out of I statements. Nobody's correcting them. And then unfortunately, sometimes you get what you get. You get what you get. And that's the whole point of why I'm putting this together, man, because if you're going to start something, do it right, and focus on the intended purpose is recovery of other people, not your own ego and your own inabilities. You're there to humbly grow like everybody else. So what is the first step in general? I humbly admit there's part of my life that's not manageable. Well, I'm the group leader. I humbly admit that part of my life struggles with managing this group well, I'm working on it. You're actually modeling that to everybody else. And when you have a group that focuses on humility from the top down, I will tell you, you'll have men knocking to get into your group because they're starving for that type of experience, let's say on a weekly basis. So I hope this helps. Again, the group's guidelines are there and you can shop around, and there's a lot of other places to go through it. But, I put this together because of my experience of it not happening correctly and got tired of being the bad guy. And I think the goal isn't to be the bad guy. The goal is, again, to not quench the spirit of the group and to keep it safe. Thank you. Hope it helps.